Thanks for joining us for another episode of Biotech and Life Sciences CEO Stories. Today, our guest is Jonathan Schwartz, CEO of OrthoPreserve, a company developing an artificial meniscus implant designed to mitigate the arthritis that often results a few years after traditional knee surgery. Jonathan earned his BS in bioengineering at Clemson and then followed up with a master's in mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech. Jonathan, tell us a little bit about your background and why you originally became interested in creating an orthopedic device.
Yeah, growing up, I was always interested in going into some kind of medical field. So shadowed some surgeons in high school and saw a lot of orthopedic surgeries and got really interested in that area. Went to Clemson and did bioengineering, kind of keeping my options open between orthopedic surgery and engineering, but ultimately chose engineering because I realized I preferred being behind the scenes making the devices. But then I went to grad school at Georgia Tech and joined a lab that kind of focused on developing medical devices. And I knew I wanted to stay in orthopedics. So identified some big need areas with my advisor, and we realized that there were no meniscus implants, and the standard of care was uh, definitely lacking. So we went that route. So spent 2 years developing the implant there for my thesis project, and then graduated and passed it off to another student that continued development while I got some industry experience. And then came back to the project a few years later after connecting with an orthopedic surgeon, and that's when we started OrthoPreserve.
So, you originally began development while you were at Tech. What was the process of transitioning from academia to entrepreneurship like for you?
Yeah, so I guess when I was making it at Tech, we tried to focus on the whole process of like creating a device that could reach the market. So I actually minored in like engineering and business management to try to get some of those skills in preparation of entrepreneurship. But it's definitely different working on it in academia compared to when I went through the OrthoPreserve. So I did get good experience in like coming up with a plan, a development plan, and creating presentations for the results, but you don't really get much experience on the business side. So that was definitely a learning curve once I started the company. You kind of learn about all the different parts that go into a business, like insurance, taxes, payroll, everything that doesn't have anything to do with the engineering or the research. So I was able to kind of learn as I went and got help from a lot of advisors that are experienced in those areas. So it wasn't an easy transition, but it's definitely doable for anyone thinking about doing
So, um, we all think about the differences in mindset between working in academia or entrepreneurship. But are there is there a lesson that you learned, positive or negative, while you were at Tech that's been valuable in your role as a med tech entrepreneur?
Yeah, I would say the biggest lesson learned is getting as much done with your limited resources as you can. So, my budget for the thesis project wasn't very large at Georgia Tech, and you're just working in an academic setting that you kind of have to, um, take some not shortcuts, but like work with what you have at the time. And that's been a great lesson as I've moved into the startup world because as an early startup, you also don't have very many resources. So, so yeah, you have to get, meet as many milestones as you can with as little as you can. So I'd say that was the biggest lesson learned from my time at Georgia Tech.
Okay. So you've got kind of a fun story about your meeting your co-founders at, I think, a wedding. It's kind of
Yeah,
scene.
yeah. So kind of like that. So one of my co-founders is a longtime friend. I've known him for I don't know 15 years or so. But we had never had like a business relationship. We were, just friends in college, and he ended up going to PA school and became an orthopedic PA. And I was a groomsman at his wedding, so went to his wedding. I think it was 2020, and he had just finished PA school, started working at Ortho Virginia in Richmond, and uh, knowing that I could hit an orthopedic device, I started telling him about the meniscus implant I made in grad school, and we recognized that that was like a huge need in their practice, and a lot of patients suffered from that injury and didn't have any good options. So he brought that idea to the surgeon that he just started working for. He showed him my thesis paper, and the surgeon was also very impressed, and that's kind of how we got together and started the company. So, started the company and recruited a few other surgeons to join our advisory board who all really love the technology. So, we got a great team behind us that knows this is a big problem, and it all started from a wedding conversation.
Yeah, interesting wedding conversation, right? How was your,
Yeah.
what was your toast like after that?
No, no, I didn't give a test. But but yeah, it was it was exciting once we kind of made that connection and decided to move forward with the company. We were excited to get things going.
Okay. So tell us about the technology behind the meniscus implant that you have and how it differs from existing alternatives.
Yeah. So there's actually no FDA approved meniscus implants available right now. So there are a few in development, and ours offers pretty large advantages over all of those. I knew about the ones that were in development when I was creating this in grad school, so they have had a few problems along the way. The main difference between ours and theirs is ours is the only one that has integrated attachment features. So our implant is a hydrogel. It's shaped just like the natural meniscus. The hydrogel material has very similar mechanical properties to natural tissue, and then it's reinforced with high strength fibers that give it extra strength and durability and allow it to attach in the joint naturally, just like the normal meniscus would. So the other devices in development, one's just a free floating disc, one is drilled like directly in the bone, so it doesn't allow for normal motion in the knee joint and can pop out of place, unlike ours does.
So you started at Tech. What was the process um, of getting control of the IP like? Was that difficult?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we did file for a couple patents at while I was at Georgia Tech and the student after me. And then when we started the company, we had to go and license that IP from Georgia Tech. So went to the licensing office and started negotiating a license. And we used lawyers, we used people that knew the process and knew how to get licensed from universities, but it was definitely a longer process than I thought it was going to be. Probably took about 6 to 8 months to really finalize the license, and the terms, looking back, weren't that great. But luckily, about earlier this year, actually, we decided we wanted to go back and kind of renegotiate the license. We wanted to pay less upfront fees to kind of conserve our resources and try to get the like royalty ongoing payments down because we heard from investors that high royalties are not not something that they want to see or that potential future acquirers would want to see. So went back, and Georgia Tech actually set up like a standard licensing agreement for startups that has much more favorable terms for the startups. It's
Okay.
less fees and lower royalties, but it just includes a little equity. So we ended up getting that new license. We didn't need to use any lawyers this time, which saved a lot of money, and got that process done lot more, a lot quicker than the first one. But yeah, it's definitely not it's not an easy process, but once you get it, you have that license and can worry about
So,
all the other aspects.
but the implication is that it is now much easier than it was for everybody.
Yeah,
Is that true?
yeah. I mean, for where we license it from, at least I can't really speak for all universities. I think
Right, just tech.
Uh, yeah, speaking to a lot of other founders, dealing with university technology transfer offices isn't always the easiest. There are definitely some universities that are getting better at it.
Right. Big check mark then for growth in Atlanta.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you first spun out of Georgia Tech, you took some space at BioSpark. What was your thought process in terms of selecting BioSpark, and how did your association with them impact Ortho's early development?
Yeah, so one of the biggest benefits I think for having a space that we essentially reserved at BioSpark was when we were applying for an NIH grant, we were able to list Biospark as our, lab and office space, and just the fact that it had a community of other startups. It was in Science Square, which has that brand new building with a lot more space and room for companies to grow into. Putting all that in our grant application, I think, really helped the NIH award us that grant. And then, yeah, BioSpark also has access to Georgia Tech facilities for testing, and all the students and um, professors and researchers around that area to uh, either hire or get advice from, or kind of utilize for research purposes. And then the space itself is pretty new. It's a nice spot to be, and great, been great for us so far.
Okay. So early on, like many, maybe most entrepreneurs, you've got a day job as a process engineer. And then I guess you're writing SBIR grants at night, by candlelight,
Yeah,
right? With bread and water for dinner.
yeah,
But like most, your first applications were denied. Did you find the process frustrating? What did you learn, and how did you apply what you learned to future applications which were accepted?
yeah. So the first application obviously was the hardest. I I mean, I had to go through all the registrations, had to learn the process, what sections are needed, making sure I have everything that is part of the application package filled out. But after applying the first time, then I give you a score, and then they give you like a detailed feedback from their internal meetings. And that was very helpful because it pointed out exactly where our weaknesses were, what our strengths were, and like the scores for each different category. So there's innovation, team, approach, and impact, and environment. So getting all that feedback was very helpful for the subsequent applications. And we were able to finally submit an application that got a score that was low enough. Lower is better than I, but got a score that was low enough to get funded. But yeah, it was definitely a learning process, and doing it all while still having a day job, after I got home was probably the hardest part.
Do you remember what they said your weaknesses were?
Yeah, so one of the main um, weaknesses in specific application was the approach. So basically, when you write out all of the tests and all the research you're planning on doing, they want you to be a lot more detailed than I originally thought. So at first, I kind of just put in like, we're planning on doing this animal test for X amount of time, X amount of animals, and some benchtop testing. But then they came back saying like, we want to know like the statistical justification behind like this number of animals. Like we want to know exactly what tests you're doing after you put it in the animals, and all of the methods like the benchtop testing. So you really got to be detailed and um, kind of lay out your plan in clear terms. And then another part is just explaining the significance of the problem. You really have to go into the literature and find like data, cite your sources on how big the problem is and how many people it can help.
So you get this feedback and you take it all in. Is there a way in which that feedback itself impacted the way you thought about building a business? Where
Yeah,
you
I think
said to
so.
yourself, kind of, I didn't think of that, but that's a really good idea.
Yeah, yeah. So there was some feedback on like our team. So they would say like you don't necessarily have a lot of like commercialization experience or experience with like knee or orthopedic implants. So getting that feedback allowed us to really focus in on who we wanted to add to like our advisory team or consultants to help us, continue down the path of commercialization. Um, and yeah, and then the feedback on like the impact of the technology was really helpful in kind of building our story, like our mission, and especially now that we're talking to investors,
Right,
really building that story and laying out the problem in simple terms and how ours is going to solve it.
right. And who are especially interested in the team
Yeah,
and
yeah,
any
exactly.
prior success they've had and that sort of thing. So you get your initial SBIR, and it's a few $100,000, I think. And now you're in the middle of um, another decision process on a larger kind of phase 2 grant. What are the additional requirements for that over and above what you satisfied before?
Yeah. So the phase 2 grant through the NIH SBIR is kind of a continuation of the phase 1. So you lay out all of the results from your phase 1, and then you come up with additional research that you want to do to continue supporting that your device works and can work in humans. So um, but there's also an extra part of the phase 2, which is the commercialization plan. So phase 1 didn't really have a ton of like business kind of market strategies or anything. But phase 2, you have a 12-page document there where you list um, your market size, your sales strategy, marketing strategy, competitors in more detail, your key opinion leaders, like how you're going to get people to use the product and drive adoption. So that's kind of the main difference between the two. And then the phase 2 also, you have a 12-page of a research strategy instead of a 6-page. So um, it's definitely a lot more involved. But once you have the phase 1, all the different sections of that written and ready. It's really just adding on, 6 more pages and submitting again with your results from phase 1.
Did you work with anyone in preparing the applications, or did you just kind of do it yourself? I know there are consultants and those kinds of people that'll assist for a fee, of course, but
Yeah. Yeah, so I did probably 90% myself and then used consultants for like a final kind of review process. So I wrote everything, sent it to the consultants, and then they give feedback, just like moving sections around or adding some extra details in certain sections. So um, that actually didn't end up being that expensive, just having them review the kind of final version. But if you get a consultant to write the whole thing, that's gonna cost a lot.
yeah, okay. Um, so that first grant and family and friends and angels, I guess, and has kind of allowed you to do some early animal testing. What are the results?
The results are very good. So we only did 3 animals for 6 weeks, but the all the implants held up well. They didn't cause any bad reactions in the animals, and they protected the cartilage in the knee joint, which is was kind of our three main goals for this first study. And the second study is going to be a little longer. It's going to be 6 months to look at more long-term effects of the implant. But we're very encouraged by the first animal study results, and it's definitely a good sign for the next set of
Aside from,
studies.
but aside, since it's this is a med tech device, so it's um, maybe a little different in terms of process to the clinic, maybe or something, but um, more animals, longer time. Any other differences?
Um, Not really. I mean, the this second study is going to be done under DLP conditions. That's kind of a FDA recommendation, so it's just more detailed protocols and just making sure everything's like traceable. But other than that, there's not really much difference between the first study and the second. Just longer time frame and more animals. And the a control group to compare the standard of care to our implant.
So you've got this second phase SBIR in the works. I guess
Hmm.
you're going to hear about that sometime soon.
Yeah,
And
hopefully. Mhm.
you're in the process of raising some other money to get this second phase animal study off the ground, right?
Yeah.
Um, how much do you need to raise? And once you do that, what sort of is the process of that study? How long will it be before you have an idea of whether or not you're going to be successful?
Yeah, so this second phase NIH grant, assuming we get it, is actually going to cover the animal study, the next animal study, and some manufacturing refinement and some more good stop testing that the FDA said that they wanted to see when we met with them earlier this year. But in case if we don't get that grant, we'll use our $2 million seed round that we're currently raising to do all those tests. If we do get the grant, we would use our $2 million seed round for a small outside US human trial, maybe like 10 patients for 6 months to a year. And we would do it outside the US because it's cheaper, easier, and we can just see, make sure there's no issues before we move into the US, and the FDA is uh, really overseeing everything. But after we are able to do our animal studies and manufacturing refinement and a couple other FDA tests, then we would apply for a investigational device exemption, IDE, and that would allow us to start our clinical trials in the US. And then we would just have to run those for about 2 years to look at long-term effects of the implant, make sure it is continuing to restore mobility and relieve pain and protect the cartilage, and then we would apply for FDA approval.
Does the FDA um, have any particular opinion about going outside the US to do a small human study?
No, I mean, from what we've been told, they like seeing a little bit of clinical data before you start your US like pivotal studies. Just as long as you make sure the device is safe and, sterile packaged, make sure you've done all the earlier benchtop testing to ensure safety and efficacy. And they just want to make sure that your study is designed to where they would approve it if it were done in the US. So you just have to kind of work with them uh, to design and study, make sure you have all the proper controls in place, and they will accept outside US data from what we've heard.
But they will consult on an outside US study to help you set up those parameters. Is that
Yeah, yeah. So you would work with them to, well, they're not going to tell you how to do the study. You have to come up with it yourself and go
right?
to them and say, like, is this okay,
They're
basically,
not
and
going
they
to give
would
you
kind of
the
give
answer
you,
unless you know the answer.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. How big's the market, do you think?
So there's about 1.4 million meniscus procedures performed in the US and Europe every year. And most of those are meniscectomy, which is where they just go in and cut out your meniscus. But the problem with that is people don't like just having their meniscus cut out. That's a cushion in your knee that protects your knee joint cartilage. So once you cut it out, it disrupts that cushion and can cause recurring pain and accelerates arthritis. So 1.4 million people are still getting that procedure, even though it doesn't really, it's not the answer. Um, so 25% of those people continue to have pain after a few years. So that's kind of the main group that we're targeting, about 250,000 people in the US every year, 350,000, including Europe, would be great candidates for our device.
So how do you intend to approach that segment of the overall market?
Yeah, I mean, the patients that go into my co-founder's clinic that need this procedure are essentially asking them, like, is there nothing else you can do besides cut it out? So there's definitely patient demand, and we have a great group of orthopedic surgeons on our advisory board that'll serve as our kind of key opinion leaders, and we're going to continue to grow that as we move along. But they're gonna, go to conferences, you know, promote it. We'll make sure everyone's trained in the procedure, which is just a simple, minimally invasive combination of like other procedures that doctors already know. So we expect our superior clinical results will kind of help drive adoption and get people to start using it on their patients who already are looking for something else.
Okay. Okay. How long do you think it might take if all goes according to plan to get a full approval? At least 2 years to do the full test. What else is involved?
Yeah, so there's going to be some time required before the clinical trials for patient recruitment and then after to assemble everything and submit to the FDA. But before we can start our clinical trials, we got to do that one more animal
Right.
study for about 6 months, get all the data together for that and submit for the IDE, investigational device exemption, so we can start clinical trials. So it's it's unfortunate that there's like it's a stepwise process and you can't really skip over any steps. But if everything goes to plan, we expect around 4 years, maybe 4 to 5 years to get full approval.
Okay. So my knees have to stay in good shape for another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
I won't
exactly.
really be an old man then, but
Hopefully we can still help you.
thanks. Um, how do you balance kind of a scientific engineering sort of mindset versus the crazier business aspects of, running a business? How do you get the frontal lobe and everything working together?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a process to learn the more business oriented aspect of of having a startup. So doing the research is not, I mean, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's more natural
Right.
for me. So what I try to do is, have kind of separate them into different parts of the day or different days of the week. Really get in the lab and focus on the research one day, and then another day do all the administrative, fundraising, like business kind of stuff. So that helps. So you're not kind of mixing
Okay.
different thought processes too close together. But yeah, I mean, it's it's something that I've had to learn how to do over the last year or so. But I think I'm starting to get the hang of it.
Okay. Do you think there might be a time, sometime in the future, where you decide to bring on um, a new CEO, someone who's just business?
Yeah, I think once we move a little closer towards like commercialization, I think we're going to bring in, someone with more experience in that area. We do have a lot of advisors that have done this before and are kind of teaching me along the way. But yeah, at some point, because right now we're pretty heavily research focused, getting everything done so that we can get approval to start selling the product. But now once we get closer to needing to, build a sales force and start actually getting the product out there, I think bringing in a more experienced CEO would definitely help in that process.
Jonathan, what do you think would be your best advice to another young student at Georgia Tech with an idea who's thinking about, spinning it out to start a business?
I would say try to find people who can advise you that have done it before a lot earlier than you would think. So even if you're still a student, go to networking events, talk to people in the industry that know what they're doing and start to learn from them as early as you can. I went and worked in industry, but didn't really meet a ton of other entrepreneurs until I left my industry job and started the startup myself and started going to networking events and meeting all these different entrepreneurial people. So I would say try to meet as many of them as you can as early as you can.
How did you meet the orthopedics that are on your advisory board?
So those were connections through the my co-founder, who's an orthopedic surgeon in Richmond. But I've also been able to meet a few other orthopedic surgeons just through, networking and
Okay.
talking to people that like that are in that area. Um, so really just networking, talking to as many people as you can.
Okay, well, great. Jonathan, thank you so much for being our guest today. I enjoyed learning more about OrthoPreserve, and I'm hoping to delay any knee surgeries for another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate you having me and yeah, always happy to talk about what we're doing.
Great.
Looking forward to
Thank you.
helping
Good luck.
people
Good luck on your raise. Thanks
yeah,
for tuning in to the Life Sciences and Biotech podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. The information contained in this website and podcast are purely informational and not considered investment recommendations. Tim Doherty's participation in Biotech Insights is separate and apart from his role as an investment advisor representative. Nothing contained herein can be construed as a recommendation or endorsement of any of the companies discussed. Tim Doherty also has no financial affiliation with any of the companies mentioned in this communication. Tim Doherty makes no representation that the information contained in this material is accurate and is under no obligation to update this information as changes occur.